You know, one of the most common questions I get is, well, how do you get involved in car collecting? How do I know what to buy? Well, you should buy what you like. Then if it goes up in value, you're ahead of the game. If it doesn't go up in value, at least you got something you like. But a friend of mine, Steve Linden, has written a book. It's called Car Collecting, Everything You Need to Know. And look, it's only that thick. And it's everything you need to know. It's all right here. Steve, come on in. How you doing?
Good.
How are you? How are you? Now, this is every single thing you need to know. It's amazing that it'll all be in here.
There is nothing that you need to know that's not in that book.
Now, you do car appraising, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what's involved with appraising of cars? Let's say someone wants to buy a mid-60s split-window Corvette.
Okay.
What would you do? What was your...
Well, the first thing I would do is do a basic inspection on the car, make sure that the fundamentals of the car are correct and intact on a car like that. Certainly one of the important things would be that the engine numbers match because it is a muscle car and it's a quintessential muscle car, so much of the value is tied up in that. Then Corvettes, those particular cars have certain problem areas with the frames and rust, so I would take a quick look at that. It's not necessarily a physical inspection of the car, but it's to make sure that all the basics are intact to determine the value of the car.
And how important is number matching? Because I'm the type of person, they built so many Corvettes. If I bought a mid-60 Corvette, I would just want it to drive. I mean, if you're just someone who likes to drive a car, should you pay extra for a numbers matching car? Is it that important?
Well, that's a great question, and I always tell people who ask me that question, you have to look at the cost of owning the car, not the cost of buying the car. And of course, that depends on your ability to pay for it. If you can buy a numbers matching car, I think it's better to buy a numbers matching car because it'll always have an intrinsic value when you go to sell it, and the cost of owning it will be less.
An old trick is to sort of scrape numbers off and restamp.
Right.
How can one protect themselves? Can you spot that? Can you spot a restamped block?
99% of the time I can. They have to deck it when they scrape the numbers off. Not only do they have to replace the VIN number, which matches the last 6 numbers of the car's VIN number, but they also have to replace the code for the factory that it was built in, the build date. They use different dies for that. So if you've done it enough, you can see, and some of them are just done so sloppy that you can tell very easily.
Right. And what are some other, how about buying a car at auction? That always scares me because who just bid 100,000? What? There's always the chandelier or something.
Right.
How can people protect themselves there?
Well, auctions are a great question. There's not only the price of the car, there's also the premiums that you have to pay sometimes as a buyer, sometimes as a seller, so you have to build that in. But the best advice I can give to people when they go to an auction is set yourself a limit, stick with that limit, don't get caught up in the emotion of the auction, which happens very, very often. Like to me, what would be better? Like I always tell people, if you're buying a car, find a car club for that particular mark. Right. Talk to the president of that car club, see if there's any elderly members or somebody who wants their car to go to a good home. You might pay a little bit more, but you'll get a car that has been driven and taken care of and properly maintained. I think that's pretty good advice, isn't it? I think that's great advice. My wife always says I have what's called the sickness. And anybody who's into this has that sickness also, and they love to talk. And the car clubs is one of the things that I recommend also. Getting anything with a long ownership history that hasn't gone through the auction process, if you can do that, I think that's a better option. And what would it cost to appraise a car? Because a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to spend a lot of money, but you're actually protecting yourself, right? It's pretty inexpensive. A basic appraisal is $150. Oh, okay. And it does more than what most people realize. I mean, if you're driving that 1960-something Corvette down the road and something happens to it and it's your fault, your insurance company is going to pay off because you have an agreed value policy. But what most people don't think about is what happens if somebody else hits you and it becomes the other insurance company's problem. That's a real good question, because you have a 1965 Chevy, that's all they care about. And they're going to offer you a check for $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000, and then what do you do? So that's where the real value of the appraisal comes in. What's the hardest appraisal you've ever had to do? I actually did one just recently for a motorcycle called Ghost Rider that was built for a government competition. It's an unmanned motorcycle. You may have heard of it. Built out here in California for DARPA, the defense agency, and it's a one-off. It's very, very hard to appraise anything that's one-off because you have no comps, and it's in the Smithsonian now, so that would be the most difficult one I've ever done. Okay. Here's the book here. It's called Car Collecting, Everything You Need to Know. What other areas should we cover here? Am I missing anything? Well, I think you opened up with the best statement of all for anybody who's getting into it. The first 3 questions to ask yourself is, what do you like, what are you going to use it for, and how much do you want to spend? And if you answer those questions, you're going to love it. And something I also tell people, if you're buying a car for your kid,
don't do it. Buy them a new car. Because I meet a lot of guys in their 50s, hey, I want to get my kid a 65 Mustang like I had. Well, a 65 Mustang has no airbag.
Right.
It has the most rudimentary seat belts.
Correct.
It's got drum brakes.
Right.
You know, this type of thing. Buy yourself a Chevy Cobalt, something with the, you know, then when your kid gets to be 20 or 25 and he feels like he wants to go back and restore a car, then let him get the 65 Mustang.
Great advice.
That's probably the best advice
Yes.
I could give. Well, here it is. It's called Car Collecting, everything you need to know. And it's there's nothing highly technical in here, but
Not at
there's,
all.
I learned a bunch of stuff in it. It's a terrific book. Do you have a website?
I do have a website. It's www.stevelinden.com, or you can go direct to MBI Publishing, and it's there's a link to it at MBI.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Sure.